Well, welcome to Let's Talk Conversations on Race. Today we have us Monique Franz with us. Welcome, Monique.
Hi, Nicole. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you. You were just telling me that you were in Washington, D.C., where it's a lot sunnier than it is here in Rochester, New York.
Oh,
So,
yes. I got to see the cherry blossoms. It was beautiful. And then I had to come back home where it was
and see the rain and
nice
the melting
booty
snow.
sky. Right. Yes.
Yes. Well, we're going to be talking about interracial marriage and the biracial kids that are often the fruit of those interracial marriages. And just to give us a little bit of background, it wasn't until 1967 that the Supreme Court ruled that you could marry anybody you want in terms of race. So Chief Justice Earl Warren in Loving versus Virginia said, marriage is one of the basic civil rights of man, fundamental to our very existence and survival. Under our Constitution, the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. Now,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
it's hard to believe that that was not long ago, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, as a matter of fact, as I've shared in at least one other episode, my parents met and married in 1963 in Colorado Springs. And so when they married, their marriage was illegal in almost half of the country. And they moved to Brooklyn because they received death threats.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so they moved to New York City because my father had grown up. My father, who is deceased, is Black. My mother is white. My father had grown up in Harlem, and his parents were then living in Queens. So New York City seemed to be the logical destination place. They figured it, there was family there, plus they figured it would just be a more welcoming atmosphere. And it was, they certainly didn't receive death threats, although they did receive plenty of stares, looks, and people staring when they walked on the street holding
I can
hands.
relate. I can relate.
Yep. Yes, I'm sure you can. Even now.
Mhm.
And then especially when my sister and I were born, if we were alone with our mom, people would, look at us in the stroller and my mom, and some had the audacity, strangers had the audacity to ask, so when did you adopt them?
Right.
And my mom was like, oh, I did adopt them. I gave birth to them.
Right.
And they would look as if she just said, I'm from Mars. It was it was just, they were totally incredulous. Um, even though this is the era of hippies and anything goes, it was not true that anything goes at all.
Right, right.
Um, and every once in a while, I remember when I read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime.
I read
And
that too.
yeah, yeah. And every once in a while I realize, when I was born, I was a crime in almost half of the
Yeah.
country. So now if we fast forward to more recent times, is still in 2000, some universities like Bob Jones University would not allow interracial dating. And then they
Mhm.
finally lifted that ban, but they said you have to have a note from your parents saying it's okay.
Wow.
So not for any other kind of dating, just interracial dating.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And we have to realize that, the what fueled centuries of not allowing interracial marriage was not anything innocuous.
Right.
It was white supremacy.
Right. Right.
It wa it was the idea that, that there's such thing as a pure race,
Right.
a superior race,
Right.
and we need to keep that race, quote unquote, pure.
Right. Right.
Not to mention the fact that there was so much rape going on slave plantations that the
Right.
white race was
That
certainly not.
part's overlooked. Right.
Like everybody's got a black great great grandma.
Right.
But yes, so it's not an innocuous idea, it's a very noxious idea.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
so Monique, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to throw the ball to you. Tell us about yourself. Tell us maybe where you were born and what you do for a living.
Yeah, let's see. I identify as a writer. My day job is in education. I work in higher ed, but I like this idea of identifying. I identify as a writer, a playwright and novelist. But I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm a little bit of a nomad in that I've lived in Ohio, learned how to talk in Georgia, lived in Alabama, Washington, California, and now I'm a resident of New York City. Oh, I didn't say that I lived abroad for 12 years as well. So I'm a little bit of a nomad, but
Wow.
I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I was born to a family. I was born to teenagers, a 16-year-old mom, 18-year-old dad, and truly was the catalyst of a bona fide shotgun wedding. They were
Wow.
so young, and both of their parents were very religious. And so they made them get married, and they were just way too young. And being in the inner city, Cleveland, in the 70s, I had a very hard beginning, a very hard childhood, and lived in the inner city in the hoods, and that's where I met my husband, who is white. And one thing I thought when I saw him was, brother, you must be lost. You on the wrong side of the tracks here. That kind of started our relationship. I'm like, and he was from Maryland. He was actually he had left home and came out to California, where I was living at the time, and he was looking for Malibu surf and a blonde, and he came to the hood and found me. So he was lost. He was lost.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So I met him at 16 years old, and he when he came to our neighborhood.
Okay. So wait, so back up. So at the time you lived in Cleveland still, or you lived in, you
No, so
mentioned
at this
California.
time, yeah, at this time I lived in the San Fernando Valley. They actually there was a rough part of the San Fernando Valley. I used to live in South Central LA, and my mother, low income, she moved to the Valley, which was cheaper places. And there's one area, San Fernando Valley, Sepulveda area. It was drug infested, lots of prostitution, gang violence. Our street was so bad that you could only come in at one end. They blocked off one of the ends, so it's a
Wow.
very bad neighborhood that we
Wow.
lived in. And
Okay.
here was this white boy that came into our building, and he's jumping off the building into the pool, which you know none of us swam in that pool. So we were like, where are you coming from?
So his family moved into your apartment building?
No, no,
Okay.
actually, he actually come from a rural area in Maryland, but he was a problem teen, and he left home at 17 years old and went west, kind of rogue.
Okay.
And so he was in a low income situation, and he wound up in my apartment, him and his friend.
Okay. Wow. Wow. So what did now, was your father in the picture, or was it just your mom?
No, just my mom in the picture at this time. My parents had been divorced years before.
Okay.
So, my mom was a hardworking, I was pretty much the classic case of an at-risk teen, whose mom was away from a broken home, teenage parents. And when I saw my husband to be, um, he just looked like he was going to be the type of trouble that a young lady in this type of environment would be attracted to be honest. I'm gonna
Yeah.
tell the truth about the situation. I wasn't looking for
Tell it.
a knight in shining armor, to be honest. I was just like, hey, he looks like he's lost. He looks like
He looks
trouble.
good.
So yes, there you go. But and actually, he had his hair was completely shaven like a skinhead. He actually looked like a Nazi skinhead. And I remember thinking, I wonder if he likes black people. Well, I'm real friendly, and I'm like, oh, he'll like me. Um, so we started dating, and now this was in the 1980s,
Okay.
and we had no idea what we were getting into. I didn't see mixed couples. He didn't see mixed couples. We began as friends, and just didn't know what we were getting into, and we ran into a community that was not just opposing it; they were antagonistic against it. You know what I mean? Like
Like what community? Your families or your
my
friends or
our families, my family, his family, my friends, his friends, just trying to go out to eat with him. It was kind of dangerous because and what was the hard thing for us was actually black males at the time, in the
okay.
1980s in the hood, where they were at this point, they had become rather protective, I would say, you know what I mean? Because back in those days, white guys, they weren't marrying, they weren't committing to
No.
relationships with black women. You know what
Right.
I
They were
mean?
they were sleeping with black women,
There
but
you
not
go.
marrying black women.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. And even as a young lady, if I was dating or interested in somebody who was not black, they were interested in trying a black
Yes.
woman. And I'm
Yes.
like, hey, I'm not a science experiment.
Good for you. Good for you. Yes.
This is not
Yep.
about trying nothing. But
Yep.
me and my husband, we started off just being really good friends.
Yeah.
And it evolved into a relationship, and we were just in love. And we didn't know that people were going to be so antagonistic, where we'd go out somewhere and, black man would, um, start with my husband, and or if we go to a white area, we get the looks and the snares, and you know what I mean. So
Mhm.
we didn't even have a chance to discuss what the relationship might mean before we were actually living the
Yeah.
implications of our being together.
Right. Right.
And that was a time where, honestly, we could go a whole year. We might see a couple that looked more like your parents, a white woman with a black man in our neighborhood. But
Yes.
we did not see a black woman with a white man back in that time, late 80s. Not that they weren't there, we just rarely saw it.
Yeah,
And
and and that combination is still rare today. I mean,
right,
it's more common to see, like you said, like what my parents had. I think big generalization, but I think it's more often white women who are
right,
are willing to look at, somebody who's different from them.
right.
And it's more of a leap for white men to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And honestly, back in a lot of the criticism I got, just blatant, things that people would say was that I was betraying my race. And of course, that was actually a guilt that was hard for me, because um, I feel very proud to be an African American woman, and to hear people say that you betrayed your race. I mean, that hurts so much, and you to witness how much it seemed to hurt the men in my family. Like that was a strange phenomenon to have my uncles and cousins and father to express hurt that
Mhm.
I was with a white man, and I felt guilty. And honestly, in the first years of our courting, I mean, I felt like we both went through hell on whether we wanted to be together, but we wasn't sure if we wanted the drama, that was
Drama,
attached
everything
to it.
else. So you don't.
Especially me. Like I was really like, I don't know if I want to have wear this hat of betrayal. So
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
to make the decision whether I was going to let people dictate my life or whether I was going to be with the man that I loved.
Wow. So you don't have any brothers. It was uncles and cousins and your dad.
I have half brothers,
Okay.
but they lived far. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they often expressed, in one way or another, they expressed the hurt, whether it was just blatant, well, how could you do this, or whether it was,
Mhm.
just little. words that expressed that they
Mhm.
felt hurt. But
Mhm. What about his family? What was the first time he brought you home to meet somebody, his mom or, or yeah, the first time you met some of his family?
so it's funny because when we talked about getting married, then that's when we start to see our parents in a whole new light. We didn't know we had parents with a little bit of preference, I'm going to say, because some of them are still alive and with us. you know,
I get it.
um, we didn't know that our own parents had racist tendencies until we started talking about getting married. Now, my mother, she called my husband at the time, she called him white trash. And I was like, I had never heard my mom utter something so ugly in my life.
Wow.
And his parent, well, mostly his father was like, it's an interracial relationship. I don't think it works. I think you should get prenup, whatnot. And my husband's like, I don't have anything. I dig ditches. But at the time, it was kind of like when when Obama became president, suddenly what emerged was people's ideas about race, the
Yeah,
good, the bad, and the ugly. And we
yeah.
started to see that in our own parents because it's one thing, and my husband said, he said, my parents always taught me that everyone is equal. And then as soon as I talk about
Mm.
marrying a black woman, I'm seeing that they very much are uncomfortable with the
Don't
idea.
don't really think that. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So we
Yeah.
started to see their ideas come out. Now we've been married 31 years now. They love us to death, and his father apologized to me, again and again about
Wow.
his behavior, and we all love each other. We're all good to one another now.
That's wonderful, that's wonderful. My mother had relatives who disowned her, and there was never a reconciliation, so,
Oh wow.
um not her parents, her father was deceased, but her mother was welcoming,
Yeah.
but extended family, so that's a blessing that you had that reconciliation and that love and acceptance.
It,
Yeah.
it, it took a little bit, but yeah. Well, honestly, his grandmother, she never wanted to hold my daughter. We brought our um, new baby girl to meet the entire family. We had a few uncool remarks and whatnot, but I remember my husband, he went to place our baby in his grandmother's hand, and she kind of, held her with disdain and said, I hope she's not wet, and showed she did not want to hold her. So,
Wow.
um, that was hurtful. And I don't think she ever did hold her as a baby from that moment. So that was something that was hurtful.
Of course, because it's often the grandbabies that cause grandparents to come around.
Right, right, right.
But to have that additional layer of there's so much racism that the grandbabies didn't
Right,
cause
right.
grandparents to come around, that's big.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Now Tom's mom, she's great. She's fantastic.
yeah.
But the grandmother, I think the grandmother came around in ways, but the fact that she, I don't think my children felt any love or connection to that grandmother in particular.
Yeah, yeah. So did your husband's name is Tom?
Yeah.
So did you and Tom, did you worry that he wouldn't understand certain things about being Black, certain things maybe that you went through, that your family went through, that he wouldn't get it?
Yeah, and he didn't, and sometimes he still doesn't. But honestly, it's been 31 years, and a lot of that time we would find ourselves in different seasons of our life where we were immersed in a white community or we were immersed in a Black community.
Okay.
And, so much of our life was immersed in a Black community, then now he understands quite a bit. When we were coming from overseas, we were looking at where to live. And him being a white man, had he had a white wife, he could have moved anywhere he wanted.
Mhm.
to live. But when we were coming back to America, we had to look at the map and say, especially during the Trump administration, we had to come back and say, where do we live that we can live comfortably as a biracial couple with biracial children? And
Mhm.
so we looked at the different places that we had family, where there was more racial controversy. Honestly, I didn't know Rochester had its own thing going. I was looking at Frederick Douglass and suffrage thinking people had it together here until we got here.
Yeah. It was one of few things that was better 100 years ago,
Right.
150 years ago.
Right. So yeah, so he could have lived anywhere had he had a white wife and white children, but coming back here, he had to think about, where do I live where me and my family is safe, as Black people have to do all the time, moving to
Mhm.
a place, so
Mhm.
that's some ways that he's identifying with me a little bit better. But I remember when we first got married, and I'm just really struggling with everything. I'm struggling with the interracial thing. I'm struggling with everything. And I remember referring to Good Times, and you might relate to this, and any
Yeah.
of your listeners and viewers, they will relate to this. I made a reference to Good Times, and damn, damn, damn. And now most people have seen that episode. That's a
Yep.
African American classic right there. And my
Yes.
husband didn't know what I was talking about. And
Yeah.
I remember that was earlier in our marriage, but I remember turning around thinking, he doesn't get that. Why am I with this man?
This is basic.
This is
Right.
basic culture. But what I've found is, over the 31 years, and it really did bother me in that season. He was from an agnostic home, rural Maryland, and I was from the inner city, very religious home. And our worlds early on really did not meet. And I remember thinking, how can our marriage make it when we're on such different grounds? But now, after 31 years, and we really fought for our marriage. I'm proud to say we fought, because we had to fight the exterior as well as what was going on within us. And
Mhm.
we now, I say, it's not white culture, Black culture. Now we have a Tom and Monique culture after all
Mhm.
that time. So
Mhm. That's
um,
beautiful.
yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
really happy I stuck it out.
That's beautiful. One of the, I've shared before that I'm writing a book about raising biracial children, and we're going to get to your children in a few minutes. But um, uh, one of the things that I talk about is the importance of the sort of Tom and Monique culture, meaning, what cultural things do you value and what cultural things do I value? And how could we come together and instill those in our children so that they're not just getting one set of cultural values?
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Yeah.
we kind of look at, we see what works for both of us. You know what I mean? Because there's some things that, soul food. He can be down with soul food. Anytime. But too much soul food is problematic. So we're gonna
Right.
have
Yes.
keep another night.
Yeah.
So we're just still finding ground that is common ground for both of us.
Yeah.
And that common ground becomes a foundation for our children as well,
Yeah. Yeah. And children really push that envelope in terms of, that's when, I'm not in an interracial marriage, but I'm in sort of a multicultural marriage, and that my
Right.
husband is Jamaican. And it was when we started having children that we realized we were coming at life from different places, that the
Yes.
way he was raised in Jamaica was very different. West Indian parents are very different from hippie parents. My parents were
Yep.
hippies.
Yeah.
So and just realizing that he had a piece of the puzzle and I had a piece of the puzzle. And thankfully, we were both willing to compromise some things, um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and
And
and take you're right, no, you're right, that we were both able to hear when each other was right and wrong.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely, we feel the same way. Where we feel like we really do feel like we fit together in so many ways. You know, taking the strengths of our culture and making something nice and solid, and also some of the weaknesses of our culture, knowing that we want to not include it in what we establish together. So,
yeah.
and our children are picking up on that. They pick, you know, my kids, when they were growing up, when we were immersed in one of the Black communities, they were accused of not being Black enough.
Hmm.
And that was centered around their preferences, what
Hmm.
they preferred to listen to in terms of music, what they preferred to watch on television, how they dressed. And I love that my kids, instead of trying to conform into what people thought they should listen to and should look like and dress like, they understood that their preferences had nothing to do with who they were as individuals, and I think that took a little work on their part. And
Yeah.
that's the thing about, you know, being in a interracial marriage. Me and my husband, the most we thought is, oh, we're gonna have these pretty little,
Biracial kids.
exactly, milk chocolate kids,
Yeah.
and that's all we're thinking. We're looking at extensions of ourselves, these beautiful extensions of ourselves, but our kids, they were going through things that we had not,
Yeah.
and we actually couldn't relate to. And some of the things, the identity crisis that each one of my kids, um, you know, had, me and my husband had to figure out how to deal with them, because they were manifesting in major ways. They were
Yeah.
manifesting in depression and anxiety, and we were like, oh wait, suddenly we need some information on how to raise biracial kids. They're more than these cute little beings that we can say, you know,
Yeah.
uh, ours.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get there. But before we get there, so they were born in Hong Kong. Tell us how that happened.
Well, they weren't born in Hong Kong. They were
Oh,
raised in Hong Kong. We lived there 12 years. So they all came pretty young. My youngest was 3 at the time, and I think my oldest was 13.
okay.
But it was most of their formative life was in Hong Kong. So,
Is that because of one of your jobs or how
yeah,
did you get
we
there?
worked we were in Chinese missions. We went there as missionaries
I see.
originally, and then just stayed in humanitarian work while we were there. But um, so they were raised in Hong Kong. So they not only were they dealing with, am I white, am I black, but they were also dealing with being American in Hong Kong. And then we came to America not feeling like American at all, so.
Right. Wow. That's deep. Yeah. Wow. There's this psychologist, Dr. Sarah Geither, who said that multiracial people have to answer the question, who are you more than anyone else? I'm
Mm,
sure your kids
mm,
got that. I got that. I still get
yes.
that.
Yes.
And she said this can lead to feelings of identity crisis, which is what you started to talk about, and social isolation, especially if in answering the question, they feel like they have to choose between one of the two parents.
Yeah.
But then she sort of held out hope. She said that she found that biracial kids, if biracial kids are raised to identify with both parents, which is, I think, what you were hinting at, and to understand their complex racial heritage, they can have a higher self-esteem than
Mm,
monoracial people. And she said, quote, they are adaptable and able to function both in majority and minority spaces. So talk about, let's shift to talking about your kids more. Did you and your husband raise them to identify like you are biracial, you are both black and white, or did you raise them to say you are black? What was that what did you call them?
yeah.
In this
This is
case?
funny because when me and Tom were young and silly, we would joke, and I'd say, "Oh yeah, our kids are going to be black." You don't know the one drop rule. Our kids are going to be black, and my husband would say, "Our kids are going to be mixed. Our kids are going to be mixed." And I love it that now that they're on the scene, I can see how the wisdom that he had, and our kids just gravitated right towards that wisdom. If you ask them, or if they're forced to choose one or the other on the form, they get really agitated. They're like, look, I am Black and I'm white, and I want to be able to identify with both of those. They don't like those forms that make them choose.
Mm-hmm.
As they are, as they're older, like you, if you would ask them, they would say they're biracial.
Mm-hmm.
But they are radically advocating for social justice for African Americans at this time. There is, their heart is just, you know, I would say just rich for people of African American culture and some of the injustices that they are now witnessing now that they're back in the States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Um, just to back up a little bit, when you were saying their music preferences and stuff, I know for me, it wasn't until I got to college. Growing up, my Black friends had a very monolithic idea of what it meant to be Black, and I didn't
Yeah,
fit that.
right,
But when I went to college and I was exposed to a broader array of Black people who listened to different kinds of music also, but they were very unapologetically Black.
right.
One of my good friends was Black. She is actually a pastor of a Black church now. Um, she was a Chinese major. and
Oh,
and she gave me an African American study Bible and wrote in, an inscription in Chinese characters. So this is the kind of wide array of Black people I experienced in college. Black people who spoke fluent Chinese.
yes.
As well as sang in the gospel choir, and we'd have deep conversations together. So I think sometimes growing up, younger, more immature people just say, to be Black, you have to be X.
Right, right,
And
right,
it's probably the same with other minorities. To be Chinese, you have to be
right,
X. To
right,
be
right,
this,
right.
you have to be X. But then when you're around older people, college age people who come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and um, that's when you realize, no, there's infinite ways to be Black.
Absolutely. And I think that being in Hong Kong was really good for them in that way because there was quite a few Black expats in Hong Kong,
Hmm.
but they were of the diaspora of Blacks. So there was, Caribbean Blacks, there were Nigerian Blacks, and what I quickly learned there is that it had to do with their nation that
Mhm.
dictated a lot of their culture and their preferences. And
Yes.
so my children, they learned that, very early on that, Black had different expressions, just seeing the
Yeah.
different nationalities that were there. And I'm really grateful for them having that range, meeting, so many different Black people from all walks of life, all cultural preferences, that they didn't get locked into what a Black person should walk like, talk like,
Yeah.
prefer.
Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you started to touch on just sort of this you used the word rage. So you in 2020 you wrote an article, published an article called Biracial Rage, and you said that it was just witnessing what was going on in our country in 2020, your kids' response to it. Can you tell us about that article?
Yeah. So I wrote the article just noticing in 2020, when right around the elections, COVID was happening, the death of George Floyd, my kids just, they were like marching around the house, just angry and, talking about the news and, right in the house, they got their fist up type of thing. And, it was funny to watch because, they were raised in Hong Kong, they went to international prep schools, you know, they were missionaries, but there was a lot of privilege that they still had. And here I was raised in the inner city. You know, my father was um, often arrested and beat up by the cops. Um, so I was, and in fact, the neighborhood that I lived in, I witnessed my best friend. She had we were hanging out with a couple of fellas, as you do when you're teenage girls, you know, and she came back and she's one of those tough sisters too. To see her cry was a miracle. And she came crying and explaining that the cops that just came to harass her had put a gun to her head just to threaten us to get out of the area.
Wow.
And she was 16 years old at the time, just put a gun to her head. Now she was terrified because we, police brutality was a way of life for us in the inner city. You know, that was just something she wasn't sure that she was going to get out alive, you know, to be honest, you know. So having experienced these things in my youth, being in a being raised in a drug infested atmosphere with gangs, the policemen were always in our neighborhood, and we didn't look at them as the safe guys coming to serve and protect. We did not. In fact, being a gang atmosphere, we looked at them as the gang to be afraid of, you know, when they came around. So, so having all of these experiences, I wasn't as angry as I saw my kids angry. You know, I was angry. I was very angry about the death of Floyd, but they were, you know,
Enraged.
they were enraged, and
Yeah.
they were putting up picket signs, and they were going to every protest that was there. My son, brand new, you know, repatriating back into America, he started to organize protests and just, you know, became very vocal in the community. And I was just like, this is interesting. These kids are mad as hell. And for whatever reason, as I'm seeing them marching around the house, you know, and I got this, you know, writer type mind. So I'm just like, what I'm sensing is a biracial rage, you know, I'm just sensing this something. And my daughter, she explained it. I wish I could explain it the way she said it. She said, you know, we were brought up seeing the injustice and experiencing the injustice, but we also have the other side, the white side of us that has been allowed a voice. And she says, you know, and we're using that voice, you know, we've got both of those worlds. And
That's beautiful.
so as I was looking, you know, I was like, can I interview you guys? I just really want to get to the bottom of what I'm witnessing here in this house. And so I interviewed them on where their rage was coming from. And a part of what their rage was coming from was having that broad perspective of what's happening in the Black community, and then being in a white community and seeing the privilege there, but also seeing how people treated their mother and how people treated their dad. You know, when they went out with dad, how he was automatically given a respect. And then when they go out with their mom, how they see their mom cowering and, you know, and trying to establish some sense of presence where she's not ignored, or, you know. And so they were seeing these dynamics and coming to conclusions of their own. Also being very light-skinned children in, especially in Hong Kong, people thought they were, you know, free places to practice their own racist, you know, and to practice their racist slurs and whatnot. And so they would use them on my kids. And my kids, you know, not being brought up in America, they felt very isolated to try to defend themselves. You know, they're one Black kid in a, you know, school, maybe there would be another Black kid in a completely different grade or whatnot, but they felt very isolated. So they didn't feel like they could really
Defend
up
themselves.
for themselves. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So they were dealing with stuff on their own.
Yeah. But this is the first time, you know, in 2020, fast forward to 2020, you know, they're in America now. They can be vocal.
Right.
They found their voice. You
Yes.
know, I'm just so intrigued by that phrase biracial rage because I feel like if you look into the world and some of the most vocal people, I mean,
Yes.
there's plenty
Yes.
of there's plenty of very vocal Black people who, but a lot of really vocal people are biracial,
They are.
including myself. I mean, I'm not, I wouldn't call myself an activist. I don't have the activist personality, but in terms of what I'm passionate about, what this season of my life is all about, um, you know, I've written one book about, what I'm writing another book about,
Yes.
is, what I talk about so much, who I am, is just dealing with this thing of race and racism. And I'm not unique. You look at, you know, Colin Kaepernick, taking the knee and getting
Yes.
kicked out of the NFL.
Yes.
He's biracial,
Yes.
and
And way
so
back to Frederick Douglass,
yes,
just biracial,
yes. Yes, W.E.B. Du Bois
Yes,
was
yes,
biracial,
yes.
and, yes, so
I
I think there must be this common there's an aspect of privilege that we
Mhm.
have, biracial people have, being, unfortunately, the lighter you are,
Yeah,
the more privilege you have, the more benefit
right.
of the doubt you get sometimes,
Yes,
the
yes,
more trust from white people you receive,
yes.
the more palatable you are to white
Yeah,
people. So you have some privilege and some access that you might not have if you're fully Black.
yeah,
And yet, and so there's the sense of I'm going to use that.
absolutely. And after talking with my kids, we had this conversation about how, in many ways, they're like a Moses or an Esther, where I feel like God has put them, here's where I incorporate my faith, but,
Go ahead. Yes, please.
but they're kind
Be
of like,
all of who you are.
exactly. But they're kind of like Moses, where they are on the bridge of two cultures,
Mhm.
and they're given that perspective for a reason, so that those that are fully Black can see some things they need to see, and so that some that are white can see things that they need to see, and they're on the bridge for a purpose. I know that their moments of identity crisis may be hurtful and painful, but it's needed for them to be there. Their rage is needed too.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
because
Yes.
if they did not have those two perspectives to be able to say, okay, look, I'm going to stand in the gap for both of y'all here, then
Yeah.
we wouldn't have I know for Blacks, we wouldn't have the advocacy that we needed, So I tried to get my kids to think of it that way. You have those two perspectives for a really good reason. And so now they're
Yeah.
using that perspective.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that, the bridge between the two. You see that so much in the Bible. You see that with, like you say,
Yeah.
Moses and Esther. You see that with Daniel. Um,
Yes,
right. They're not necessarily biracial, but they're multicultural.
absolutely.
They're
Absolutely.
bicultural. Yeah, and, I was just watching an interview with Nicole Hannah-Jones, who authored the 1619 Project, and she's another one, she's biracial.
Yeah.
And she talked about the rage that she feels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So if you, just wrapping up here, if you could talk to all interracial couples in the world, let's say, not just America, because you go to Europe,
Mhm.
and you see lots of interracial couples. If you could talk to interracial couples about raising biracial kids, what are the kinds of things you would say to them? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would probably, and I would take this from the errors I made, not because I had it all together. This is from the errors that I made as an individual. Um, I would encourage them to embrace both cultures, for one. And also, what I had a tendency to do is to celebrate some African American, the good parts of us, and I would um, speak poorly about something in white culture. And that I would say to parents, don't do that, because your children, they are of two cultures. Don't
Mm.
speak poorly of one of the cultures that your children are, because then they could hate one part of themselves or deny one part of themselves.
Yeah.
And they bring two cultures. That's a beautiful thing, to bring two cultures together. So I
Yeah.
would say embrace the beauties of both the cultures, have your children embrace those beauties, and to not speak poorly of one of the cultures or act like one is better than the other.
That's so rich. That's so good. You're right. It's easy to overcompensate. It's
Yeah,
easier because in one sense we do in terms of the books that they're going to read in
right,
school. They're going to read mostly white authors. Their history is going to be mostly white heroes in school. So at home we do have to kind of intentionally teach them Black heroes
right,
and give them books by Black authors. But we don't want to go overboard to the point that we have to intentionally give them uh, the beauty of Blackness, but we don't want to go overboard and then saying, all of the, all the negatives of
right,
whiteness.
right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And and it could go the other way. I had a biracial friend. She explained how her mother was white, but her mother repeatedly said negative things about Black women in particular, where she it was very hurtful for the woman, because she's like, I am Black, and sometimes I think my mother forgets that.
Yeah.
um, but I definitely did a lot of it, and just complaining about some of the systematic things, and talking about white people in general. And my kids, they didn't dig that, and I like the fact that they often corrected me for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I wanted to, if it's okay, to go back to what we're talking about this
Please.
biracial rage, and I put it at the end of my article. But for I think it was helpful. My son, he had explained my idea of biracial rage. He said, he said, I think that's a trick of the light. And I was like, trick of the light? He said, yes, a colorism thing, just like what we talked about, the fact that people will find a lighter skin more palatable. He said, it's really not biracial rage. It is Black rage. It is that Black people are angry, and it's the Black in me that's angry. So I thought
So
that was
good.
a really a
Yes.
good point, that, they biracial people who are advocates like yourself. I admire what I see of your work, your posting, and I'm like, she's a true advocate for our community. And I think God has positioned you to be that person for us, and people like my kids. um, but I love the fact that he was able to bring it back to, it is Black anger, and it's the Black in me that's unhappy
Mhm.
about, you know,
Mhm.
racial injustice. And
Mhm.
um, he
That's
just happens to have that biracial face that some of his white friends will finally listen.
Yeah. Yes, right, right. Right. Yeah, yeah. That's wonderful. That's wonderful that he clarified that. It's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Well, thank you so much, Monique. This was so rich.
Oh, thank you, Nicole.
So
And
rich.
like I said, I just love the advocacy work that you're doing. I think it's absolutely just necessary, and just happy to be here today.
Oh, so happy to have you. So happy to have you. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, great. Bye bye.
Bye.